You ever get that feeling, like you knew something before it happened? Not guessed it, not hoped for it, knew it. Yet that moment when your chest tightens for no reason, when your mind whispers something you can't explain, and then reality just quietly follows your script like it had no choice. Funny thing is, they'll call it coincidence. They'll dress it up in equations, probabilities, neat little boxes labeled physics, because if it doesn't fit their rules, it makes them uncomfortable. But you don't feel comfortable ignoring it, do you? There's something off about how you experience things. Like you're slightly ahead of the moment. Like you're reading a page before it's even printed. And that's where it gets interesting. Because long before labs, formulas, and people pretending they understand everything, there were words for people like you. Not gifted, not lucky, something else. Something they didn't fully understand, but respected enough to write down, and feared enough to never forget. You didn't guess it. That's the part that bothers you. It wasn't a lucky shot in the dark, or some hopeful little wish you threw into the void. It came to you quietly. No noise, no announcement, no dramatic build-up. Just a thought that slipped into your mind, like it already belonged there, and you felt it. Not in a logical, step-by-step kind of way. Not something you could explain to someone else without sounding a little off. It was deeper than that. Like your body knew before your brain could catch up. Like something inside you leaned forward and whispered, "Pay attention, this matters." You've tried to ignore it before, haven't you? Told yourself it was nothing. Just overthinking. Just your imagination running a little too wild. That's what they teach you, after all. If it doesn't come with proof, measurements, or some clean explanation, then it must not be real. So you brushed it aside. And then it happened anyway. Exactly how it felt. Exactly how you saw it in your head. The same situation, the same outcome, sometimes even the same words. And in that moment, there's this strange silence inside you. Not shock, not excitement. Recognition, like you've been there before. That's the part no one talks about. They'll tell you about intuition, instincts, subconscious pattern recognition, nice, safe words that make it sound manageable. Controlled, understood. But this doesn't feel controlled. It feels like you're standing slightly ahead of time, catching fragments of something before it fully arrives. Like reality leaks just enough for you to notice, but never enough for you to prove it. And that's what makes it dangerous, because you start questioning yourself. Was it really that clear? Did you just reinterpret it after it happened? Are you connecting dots that were never actually there? That's how doubt creeps in, slow, quiet, persistent. But here's the problem, it keeps happening. Different moments, different situations, same feeling. That quiet signal that something is about to unfold in a very specific way. And every time you try to dismiss it, it shows up again a little sharper, a little harder to ignore. You start noticing patterns, not the obvious ones everyone can see, the subtle ones, the ones hiding in behavior, in tone, in the way people hesitate before they speak, the way situations build, like tension in the air before a storm no one else notices yet. And somehow you read it, not perfectly, not every time, but enough to make you pause, enough to make you wonder why you seem to catch these things, while everyone else walks straight into them, blind and unprepared. That's when it shifts. It stops feeling like coincidence. Coincidences don't repeat themselves with this kind of precision. They don't follow the same emotional signature, the same internal signal that you've come to recognize, even if you can't explain it. This is something else, something quieter, older, less concerned with being understood, and more concerned with being noticed. And you did notice it, that moment when you knew, before anything actually happened. Before the evidence, before the confirmation, before the world caught up to what you had already felt. That wasn't random. That wasn't luck. That was you picking up on something most people are too distracted, too conditioned, or too disconnected to ever see. And no matter how many times you try to rationalize it, reduce it, or push it away, it keeps finding its way back to you. They'll tell you it's coincidence. That's their favorite word. Simple. Safe. A convenient little label they can slap onto anything that doesn't fit their version of reality. Because once they call it coincidence, they don't have to think about it anymore. No questions, no discomfort, no cracks in the system. But you've seen it too many times for that, haven't you?
One moment.
Sure, anyone can get lucky once, twice, maybe. But this repeats, not in loud, obvious ways, but in patterns. Quiet, consistent, almost deliberate patterns that keep showing up like they're trying to get your attention. Same kind of situations, same kind of outcomes, same feeling right before it happens. That feeling again. It doesn't shout. It doesn't panic. It just sits there, steady and certain, like it already knows how things are about to unfold. And you've learned to recognize it, even if you don't fully trust it yet. That's where it gets interesting. Because patterns don't exist without structure, and structure doesn't exist without something holding it together. Think about it. If everything was truly random, truly chaotic, then nothing would repeat in a meaningful way. There'd be no rhythm, no consistency, no strange sense of familiarity when certain moments start lining up just right. But that's not what you're experiencing. You're noticing alignment. Tiny details connecting in ways they shouldn't, at least not according to the neat little rules people like to believe in. Conversations that echo each other. Situations that unfold with eerie precision. Decisions that lead exactly where you felt they would, even when the path didn't make sense at the time. And every time it happens, it chips away at that. Coincidence. Label they're so comfortable with. Because coincidence doesn't build patterns. It creates accidents, one-offs, random spikes in an otherwise unpredictable mess. But what you're seeing, that's repetition with meaning. It's like reality has a habit of leaving breadcrumbs. And somehow, you're one of the few who actually notices them. Not because you're trying harder than everyone else, but because something in you is tuned just a little differently. You catch the rhythm. You see how things start to form before they fully take shape. The way events lean toward a certain outcome long before it becomes obvious. The way people reveal themselves in fragments if you're paying close enough attention. And the more you notice it, the harder it becomes to ignore. That's why they stick to coincidence. Because admitting there's a pattern means admitting there's something deeper going on. Something they can't easily measure, control, or explain away with a quick formula. And that terrifies them. So they laugh it off, shrug it away, pretend it's nothing more than your mind playing tricks on you. Because it's easier to dismiss you than to question everything they've been taught about how the world is supposed to work. But you're past that point now. You've seen too much repetition, felt that same signal too many times, watched too many random moments line up in ways that make no sense if everything is truly accidental. At some point, you have to ask yourself, how many coincidences does it take before it stops being coincidence? Because patterns don't just appear out of nowhere. They reveal something. Something subtle. Something hidden beneath the surface of what everyone else accepts as normal. Something that doesn't need permission to exist, whether people believe in it or not. And you've been noticing it this whole time, even when you tried to convince yourself you weren't. They love their explanations, Formulas, theories, neat little diagrams that make the universe look predictable, controllable. Give it a name, wrap it in logic, and suddenly it feels less threatening. That's how they keep things comfortable. And to be fair, it works. Most of the time. Physics explains motion, energy, cause and effect. It tells you how things move, why they collide, how they react. It maps out the visible world with impressive precision. Numbers don't lie, right? But here's where it starts to crack. Because what you're experiencing doesn't sit neatly inside those equations. There's no formula for that moment when something inside you tightens without warning. No measurement for that quiet certainty that slips into your mind before anything actually happens. No equation that captures the way you feel. A situation unfolding before it reveals itself to everyone else. They'll try, though. They'll call it probability. Say you're subconsciously calculating outcomes based on past experiences. Your brain picking up on micro patterns, processing data faster than you're aware of. It sounds convincing, intelligent even, but it doesn't fully land, does it? Because this doesn't feel like calculation. It feels immediate.
Raw, unfiltered.
There's no sense of you working it out. No step-by-step logic running in the background. It just arrives complete, like the answer showed up before the question was even finished. And that's where their explanations fall short. Science depends on observation, repetition, verification. If something can't be consistently tested, measured, and reproduced under controlled conditions, it stays in the gray area, uncertain, unproven. So they push it aside. Not because it's impossible, but because it's inconvenient. Because how do you measure something that shows up differently every time? How do you quantify a feeling that doesn't follow a schedule, doesn't respond on command, and refuses to be pinned down under a microscope? You can't. So instead of expanding the model, they shrink the experience, reduce it, dismiss it, fit it into the closest explanation available, even if it doesn't quite match. Because the alternative means admitting there are things happening that their current understanding can't fully grasp. And that's not something they're comfortable with. But you're not dealing with comfort anymore. You're dealing with something that keeps breaking through those explanations. Something that refuses to be simplified into just coincidence or just probability. Something that feels intentional in a way that's hard to put into words. Not controlled by you, not fully understood by them, just there. And every time it happens, it pulls you further away from those neat, structured answers. Not because they're completely wrong, but because they're incomplete. They explain the surface. You're experiencing something beneath it. That's the tension you feel. That quiet conflict between what you've been taught to believe and what you've actually lived. The moment where logic says one thing, but your experience says something else entirely. And experience has a way of being stubborn. You can ignore it, doubt it, try to rationalize it into something more acceptable, but it doesn't disappear. It keeps showing up in those small, precise moments that don't ask for your permission to exist. And every time it does, it leaves the same question hanging in the air. If everything is already explained, then why does this keep happening in a way that nothing fully explains? Long before anyone started writing equations on boards, before labs, before controlled experiments, before people needed proof stamped and approved there were observers, not the kind that needed instruments, the kind that paid attention. They didn't have your modern language. No polished terminology, no scientific frameworks to lean on. Just experience repeated, undeniable experience that forced them to take it seriously, whether they understood it or not. And when something keeps happening, when it shows up across different people, different places, different moments, you don't ignore it. You give it a name. That's exactly what they did. Not because they had all the answers, but because they recognized the pattern. The same subtle awareness you felt. The same quiet knowing that appears without warning. The same sense that some people operate just a little differently from the rest. They noticed individuals who seemed tuned into something deeper. People who could sense shifts before they happened. Who could read situations before they fully unfolded. Who spoke about outcomes that others couldn't yet see. At first, it probably confused them. Then it intrigued them. And eventually it unsettled them. Because when someone can see what you can't, it creates distance. Not just physically, but mentally. It challenges the idea that everyone is experiencing reality the same way. And that idea, people cling to it. So these individuals were set apart, sometimes respected, sometimes feared, sometimes misunderstood to the point of isolation, but never completely ignored. Because you can't ignore something that keeps proving itself. These weren't random labels either. They weren't thrown around casually. They carried weight, meaning history. Each word tied to observations that had been repeated over generations. Stories passed down, not as entertainment, but as warnings or acknowledgments. Different cultures, different languages, yet strangely similar descriptions. That's what makes it hard to dismiss. Because when the same idea appears in places that never even touched each other, when different groups of people describe the same kind of awareness, the same kind of perception, the same kind of knowing, it stops looking like imagination. It starts looking like recognition. They didn't try to shrink it into something convenient. They didn't reduce it to fit a system that made them feel in control. Instead, they accepted that there was something they didn't fully understand and chose to document it anyway. That takes a different kind of honesty. Not the kind that demands certainty, but the kind that acknowledges mystery without trying to erase it. And here's the part that lingers. Those words, those labels, they weren't created for everyone. They were created for a specific kind of person. Someone who experiences moments that don't align with ordinary explanation. Someone who notices patterns others overlook. Someone who feels that quiet signal before things unfold. Sound familiar? Because if it does, then you're not standing in something new. You're standing in something old. Something that existed long before you ever questioned it. Long before anyone told you what's real and what's not. Long before modern explanations tried to tidy everything up into neat categories. And the strange part, even without knowing those words, even without reading those texts, you've already felt exactly what they were trying to describe. Which means whatever they were pointing at, it never really disappeared. Most people move through life on the surface. They see what's obvious, hear what's said, react to what's right in front of them, nothing more, nothing less. It's simple that way, clean, predictable. No need to question too deeply, no need to notice what hides between the lines. And honestly, it works for them. Because when you don't look deeper, you don't have to deal with what you might find. But you don't seem to have that option. You notice things, small things. The kind that slip past everyone else without leaving a trace. A pause in someone's voice that lasts just a second too long. A glance that doesn't match the words being spoken. The way someone shifts their posture when a certain topic comes up, like their body is telling a story they're trying to keep hidden. You catch that. Not because you're trying to analyze every little detail, but because it just stands out to you. Like your mind highlights it automatically, pulling your attention toward what doesn't quite fit. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's the difference. Others move on. They accept things at face value, comfortable with the version of reality that's presented to them. But you hesitate. You look twice. You feel that quiet signal telling you there's more going on beneath the surface. And most of the time, you're right. It's not always dramatic, not always life-changing. Sometimes it's subtle. A conversation that feels slightly off. A situation that seems normal on the outside, but carries a strange tension underneath. A decision someone makes that doesn't align with what they claimed to believe. You notice the cracks, and those cracks start forming patterns. You begin to recognize how people operate beyond their words, how situations evolve based on unspoken factors, how outcomes aren't always as random as they appear when you pay attention to the right details. It's like watching two different versions of reality at the same time. The one everyone else sees, and the one that reveals itself in fragments, in hints, in those tiny inconsistencies that most people overlook. And the more you notice it, the more isolated it can feel. Because how do you explain that to someone who doesn't see it? How do you put into words the feeling that something isn't right when everything looks fine on the surface? How do you justify a sense of certainty when you can't point to a single, concrete piece of evidence without it sounding insignificant? You can't. So you stay quiet. You observe. You let people believe what they want to believe while you keep collecting those small details, those subtle signals, those moments that confirm what you felt long before anything became obvious. And over time it sharpens. Your awareness becomes more precise. Your instincts become harder to ignore. That quiet signal you once doubted starts to feel more familiar, more reliable. Not perfect, not infallible, but consistent enough to change how you move through the world. You start trusting what you notice, even when it doesn't make sense to anyone else. And that's when it really separates you. Because while others are reacting to what's already happened, you're adjusting to what's about to happen. Not because you have all the answers, but because you're paying attention to things they never even realized were there. At some point, it stops being something you can ignore, not because it suddenly gets louder, but because it becomes consistent. Too consistent to brush off, too precise to keep labeling as random. Those moments you used to question, they start stacking up, one after another, building a quiet kind of evidence that doesn't need anyone else's approval. And that changes something inside you. You stop reacting the way you used to. Situations don't catch you completely off guard anymore. Not because you control them, but because you feel them coming. That subtle shift in energy, that familiar signal that tells you something is about to unfold in a certain direction, it starts guiding you, whether you consciously admit it or not. You hesitate at different moments. You step back when something feels off, even if everything looks fine on the surface. You move forward when something feels right, even when there's no logical reason to trust it. And more often than not, those choices lead you exactly where they needed to. That's when it stops feeling like a coincidence and starts feeling like an advantage. Not the kind you can show off, not something you can easily prove or demonstrate on command, but something that quietly shapes your decisions, your timing, your awareness of what's really happening beneath everything people say and do. You begin to see outcomes before they fully form, not in perfect detail, not like some clear vision laid out in front of you, but in direction, in tendency, in that unmistakable pull toward a specific result that becomes clearer the more attention you give it. And once you see that, you can't go back. You can't pretend you don't notice the warning signs. You can't unfeel that tension When something isn't right, you can't return to that comfortable blindness where everything is taken at face value without question. Because now you know there's more, and knowing changes how you move. You become more deliberate, more aware of timing, of people, of situations that carry hidden weight. You start trusting pauses, silences, small details that once seemed irrelevant, but now feel like pieces of a much larger picture. It's subtle, but powerful. Because while others are waiting for clear confirmation, you're already adjusted. While they need things to happen before they believe them, you're already shifting based on what you sense before it arrives. That creates distance, not in a dramatic way, not something obvious to everyone around you, but enough to set you apart.